Elena Voss stood frozen in the hallway, as every eye in Silverclaw Academy turned toward her at once, and she knew immediately that something was wrong. The whispers started before she even reached the front doors, sharp and quick, like claws scraping against stone. She had expected stares. She had not expected the room to go completely silent the moment she stepped inside. Her hands tightened around the strap of her bag. She had trained herself for years to stay calm in tense moments. But this was different. This was a school built for the strongest packs in the region, a place where status meant everything, and she had walked in with none. No pack, no name anyone recognized, no protection. A tall boy with sharp green eyes leaned against a locker, watching her with open curiosity. Beside him, a group of girls in matching blue blazers were already exchanging glances, the kind that promised trouble. Elena kept walking, her chin lifted, refusing to let her nerves show on her face. She found her assigned room on the 3rd floor of the East Wing, a small space with a single bed, a desk, and a window that looked out over the training fields. She dropped her bag onto the bed and finally let herself breathe. For a moment, she allowed herself to hope that maybe this place would be different from the last one. Maybe here she could disappear into the background and simply finish her education in peace. That hope did not last long. By the time she reached her first class, rumors were already spreading through the academy like wildfire. She heard fragments of conversation as she passed groups of students in the corridor. A transfer with no pack, probably running from something. Wonder why she's really here. Elena ignored them all. She had learned long ago that explaining herself never helped. People believed what they wanted to believe, and nothing she said would change that. She slipped into her seat at the back of the classroom, keeping her eyes down, hoping to avoid drawing any more attention to herself. It was then that the door opened and the entire room shifted. Every girl straightened in her seat. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the teacher, who had been writing on the board, paused for a fraction of a second, before continuing, as if nothing had happened. Elena looked up, curious despite herself, and saw the boy from the hallway walk in, moving with an easy confidence that suggested he was used to being watched. This was Damon Ashworth. She did not know his name yet, but she did not need to. Everything about the way people reacted told her enough. He was important, he was powerful, and judging by the way half the girls in the room seemed to hold their breath as he passed, he was also someone many of them wanted. Damon took his seat near the front without looking at anyone, which surprised Elena. She had expected arrogance, the kind of behavior that came with being adored by an entire school. Instead, he seemed almost bored by the attention, his jaw tight, his eyes distant, as though he had long since stopped noticing the effect he had on people. Elena told herself it did not matter. Whoever he was, whatever he represented, she had no interest in being pulled into whatever social hierarchy ruled this school. She was here to survive her final years of education, nothing more. She turned her attention back to her notebook and tried to focus on the lesson. But she felt it, a weight on the side of her face, subtle but unmistakable. She glanced up just enough to catch Damon looking at her, not with the casual curiosity of a stranger, but with something more searching, as though he were trying to solve a puzzle he did not yet understand. The moment their eyes met, he looked away first, and Elena felt a strange flush of warmth she quickly pushed down. It meant nothing, she told herself. He was probably just wondering who the new outsider was, the same way everyone else seemed to be wondering. She would not let herself read anything more into it. The rest of the class passed without incident. When the bell rang, Elena gathered her things quickly, hoping to slip out before anyone could stop her. She made it halfway down the hallway, before a voice called out behind her, light and teasing but edged with something colder. "You're the new girl, right?" Elena turned to see a girl with golden hair and perfectly applied makeup approaching her, flanked by 2 others who looked equally polished. This was Bianca Sterling, though Elena did not know her name yet either. She would learn it soon enough, and she would learn to be careful around it. "I am," Elena said simply, keeping her tone neutral. Bianca studied her for a long moment, her gaze sweeping over Elena's simple clothes, her plain hairstyle, the absence of any pack emblem on her uniform. "No pack mark," Bianca said, almost to herself. "Interesting." "I transferred in," Elena said. "It's a long story." "I'm sure it is," Bianca replied, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Well, welcome to Silverclaw. Just so you know how things work here, there are rules. Unspoken ones, but rules all the same. and one of them is that certain people are simply off limits to certain other people. Elena felt her patience thinning, but she kept her voice even. I don't know what you're talking about. You will, Bianca said, her smile widening just slightly. Enjoy your first day. She walked off, with her friends trailing behind her, leaving Elena standing alone in the hallway, unsettled, but refusing to let it show. She had dealt with mean girls before. She could handle whatever games this school wanted to play. What she could not understand yet was why Bianca's warning had felt less like generic bullying and more like something specific, something aimed directly at the strange, lingering look Damon had given her in class. She pushed the thought aside and made her way to the academy's central courtyard for the lunch period, hoping to find a quiet corner where she could eat alone and gather her thoughts. The courtyard was massive, filled with long tables and groups of students clustered by year and by pack affiliation. Elena, belonging to neither category, found an empty bench near the edge of the field and sat down. She had barely opened her lunch when she felt eyes on her again. She looked up to see a boy from her class settling onto the same bench, several feet away, not quite looking at her, but clearly aware of her presence. He had dark hair, kind eyes, and an easy smile that made him seem far less intimidating than most of the students she had encountered so far. You looked like you could use a friendly face, he said. I'm Oliver. Elena, she replied, cautious but not unkind. I saw what happened with Bianca, Oliver said, shaking his head. She does that to every new student, especially the ones who don't already belong to a pack. Don't take it personally. She mentioned something about rules, Elena said, about certain people being off limits. Oliver's expression shifted slightly, a flicker of understanding crossing his face. Ah, she's talking about Damon. Elena's stomach tightened at the name, though she was careful not to let it show. The one everyone was staring at in class? That's him, Oliver said. Damon Ashworth, heir to the Ashworth pack, which is basically the most powerful pack in this entire region. Every girl here has spent years trying to get his attention. Some of them have built their entire reputations around being seen with him. That sounds exhausting, Elena said honestly. Oliver laughed, surprised by her bluntness. It is. For everyone except him, I think. He's never seemed interested in any of it. Some people think he's just picky. Others think there's something else going on, something he doesn't talk about. Elena considered this for a moment, unsure why she found the information so interesting. And Bianca is one of the girls trying to get his attention? She's the one who tries hardest, Oliver said. She's convinced herself that she's the obvious choice, given her family's standing. She doesn't like competition, and she especially doesn't like unexpected competition. Elena frowned. I'm not competition for anything. I don't even know him. I believe you, Oliver said, but I don't think that will matter much to Bianca. She saw him looking at you in class. That's usually enough to earn a warning. Elena's mind flashed back to the moment their eyes had met, the strange warmth that had spread through her chest before she pushed it away. She had told herself it meant nothing. Apparently, others had noticed it too, and had already decided what it meant before she even had the chance to understand it herself. This is ridiculous, she muttered, mostly to herself. Welcome to Silverclaw, Oliver said with a wry smile. It gets more ridiculous the longer you stay. The rest of the lunch period passed, with Oliver filling her in on more details about the academy's social structure, the different packs represented among the student body, and the general rules of survival for someone without an established name. Elena appreciated his honesty, even if the picture he painted made her wish, briefly, that she had never transferred here at all. By the time her final class of the day arrived, Elena felt exhausted, not physically but mentally, worn down by the weight of being watched and discussed by people who did not know the first thing about her. She slipped into her seat, grateful that this particular class did not include Damon or Bianca, and allowed herself to relax slightly. Her relief was short-lived. Near the end of the lesson, the professor announced an upcoming assignment that would require students to be paired for a joint project related to the Academy's pack trials preparation. Elena barely paid attention to the announcement, assuming it applied to a different class entirely, until the professor mentioned that pairings would be posted the following morning on the main hallway board, drawn from every student regardless of class section. Elena's stomach twisted slightly at the thought of being paired with someone she did not know, someone who might already have opinions about her formed from the day's rumors. She told herself it would be fine. She would do her part, keep her head down, and get through the assignment without incident, just as she planned to get through everything else at this school. When the final bell rang, Elena gathered her things and made her way back toward the dormitory building, grateful for the chance to finally be alone. The hallways had mostly emptied, students rushing off to their evening activities or training sessions, and for the first time all day, Elena felt herself begin to relax. She rounded a corner near the library entrance and nearly collided with someone walking quickly in the opposite direction. Books scattered across the floor between them, and Elena immediately dropped to her knees to gather them, embarrassed by her own clumsiness. "I'm so sorry," she said quickly, scooping up a heavy textbook and looking up to hand it back to whoever she had bumped into. Her words died in her throat when she saw who it was. Damon Ashworth knelt across from her, gathering his own scattered papers, his green eyes lifting to meet hers with an expression she could not quite read. For a moment, neither of them said anything, the noise of the emptying hallway fading into the background. "It's fine," he said finally, his voice quieter than she expected, lacking the arrogance she had assumed would come naturally to someone in his position. "I wasn't watching where I was going either. I should have been more careful," Elena said, handing him the last of his papers and rising to her feet. Damon stood as well, studying her with the same searching look he had given her in class earlier that day. "You're the new student," he said. It was not quite a question. "Elena," she said, deciding there was no point pretending otherwise. "Elena Voss." "Damon," he replied, though something in his tone suggested he expected her to already know his name, and was mildly surprised when her expression remained unchanged, showing no recognition, no sudden shift into the careful performance he had clearly grown used to seeing from other girls. "I know," Elena said honestly. "People have been talking about you all day." A flicker of something crossed his face, tired and familiar, as though this was a conversation he had endured countless times before. "I imagine they have," he said, his voice carrying a trace of weariness. "It's usually the first thing anyone says to me." Elena considered this for a moment, sensing an opening she had not expected to find. "For what it's worth, I don't really care who you are. I just wanted to apologize for running into you." Something shifted in his expression, subtle but unmistakable, a flicker of surprise followed by something softer, something curious. It was a small moment, barely worth noting to anyone else, but Elena would later remember it as the exact instant everything at Silverclaw Academy began to change. "Apology accepted," Damon said, a faint smile touching the corner of his mouth. "Watch where you're going next time, Elena Voss." "I will," she said, matching his small smile despite herself. "Watch where you're going too." He laughed, a short, genuine sound that seemed to surprise even him, and then he turned and continued down the hallway, leaving Elena standing alone amid the quiet, her heart beating slightly faster than she wanted to admit. She told herself it was simply the adrenaline of the collision, nothing more, and forced herself to continue toward her dormitory. But as she walked, she could not shake the feeling that something important had just happened, something that would not stay as small and forgettable as she wanted it to be. She had come to Silverclaw Academy, hoping to remain invisible, to survive quietly among people who already had their lives and reputations decided. Instead, in the span of a single day, she had somehow found herself standing in the middle of a story she did not yet understand, watched by rivals she had not asked for, and noticed by someone who, according to everyone around her, never noticed anyone at all. That night, lying in her new bed and staring at the unfamiliar ceiling above her, Elena replayed the moment in the hallway over and over, trying to convince herself it meant nothing. She almost believed it. Almost. Somewhere else in the academy, in a much larger room reserved for the heir of the Ashworth pack, Damon Ashworth stared at his own ceiling, equally unable to sleep, equally unable to explain why a simple apology from a girl with no name and no pack had unsettled him more than anything had in years. The pairing list appeared on the hallway board exactly as promised, and by the time Elena arrived at breakfast, half the academy had already seen it. She could tell something was wrong the moment she walked into the dining hall, because the usual noise dropped for a second time in 2 days, and every head turned toward her table. She ignored it as best she could, filling her tray and finding an empty seat near the window. Oliver joined her a few minutes later, sliding into the chair across from her with an expression that was half amusement, half concern. "You saw the board yet?" he asked. "No," Elena said, immediately wary. "Why?" Oliver hesitated, clearly debating whether to just let her find out on her own, or warn her first. He chose the second option. "You're paired with Damon Ashworth for the Pack Trials project." Elena set down her fork slowly. "You're joking." "I wish I was," Oliver said. "The whole school is talking about it already." Bianca looked like she wanted to set the board on fire. Elena closed her eyes briefly, feeling the weight of the entire academy pressing down on her again, the same way it had the day before. She had wanted nothing more than to remain unnoticed, and now, through no effort of her own, she had been placed directly beside the one person guaranteed to draw every eye in the building. "Maybe I can ask to switch," she said, more to herself than to Oliver. "You can try," Oliver said doubtfully, "but pairings for the Pack Trials project are usually final. The professors say it teaches cooperation across pack lines. I don't think they make exceptions." Elena spent the rest of breakfast turning the problem over in her mind, searching for some way to avoid what felt like an inevitable collision course. By the time she reached her first class, she had resolved to speak to the professor directly and request a change, regardless of how unlikely Oliver thought her chances were. She found Professor Hale in his office before the first bell and explained, as calmly as she could, that she would prefer a different partner for the assignment. The professor listened patiently, then shook his head with a small, apologetic smile. "The pairings are designed to encourage students who wouldn't normally interact to build cooperative skills," he explained. "That's rather the entire point of the exercise, Miss Voss. I understand the social dynamics can feel complicated, but I'm afraid the assignments are final." Elena thanked him for his time, though she left his office feeling no better than when she had entered. There was nothing left to do but accept the situation, and hope it would pass without too much disruption to the quiet life she had hoped to build here. She saw Damon later that morning, in the main corridor, standing near a group of underclassmen who seemed to hang on his every word. He caught her eye across the hallway, and for a brief moment, something like a smile flickered across his face before he schooled his expression back into practiced neutrality. Elena nodded politely and kept walking, unwilling to give anyone watching another reason to speculate about the strange new pairing. She told herself the project would simply require a handful of study sessions, nothing more, and once it concluded, she could return to her original plan of blending quietly into the background of academy life. That plan did not survive the first study session. They met that afternoon in a small study room on the library's second floor, chosen specifically because it offered a degree of privacy from the constant attention that seemed to follow Damon everywhere else in the building. Elena arrived first, spreading her materials across the table and trying to ignore the nervous energy building in her chest. Damon arrived a few minutes later, carrying a stack of books and wearing an expression that seemed, for once, entirely unguarded. He set his materials down across from her and offered a small, tired smile. "Sorry I'm late," he said. "I had to escape a rather persistent conversation about training schedules." "It's fine," Elena said, relaxing slightly at his casual tone. "I was starting to wonder if you'd actually show up." "Why wouldn't I?" he asked, genuinely curious. "I don't know," Elena admitted. "I guess I assumed someone in your position might have better things to do than a school project with the new outsider." Something in his expression shifted, a flicker of something that looked almost like disappointment. "Is that really what people think of me?" Elena studied him for a moment, surprised by the vulnerability in the question. "I don't know what people think of you," she said honestly. "I've only been here 2 days, but everyone seems to talk about you like you're some kind of celebrity, not an actual person." Damon let out a short, humorless laugh. "That's about right," he said. "Most people here don't actually want to know me. They want to be seen with me. There's a difference." Elena considered this for a long moment, unsure how to respond to something so openly honest from someone she had assumed would be far more guarded. "That sounds lonely," she said finally. Damon looked at her with an expression she could not quite decipher, somewhere between surprise and gratitude. "It is," he admitted. "Most people don't notice that, or they don't care." They worked in relative silence for the next hour, dividing the research requirements for their project and outlining the basic structure of their presentation. Elena found herself relaxing more than she expected, comfortable in a way she had not anticipated, given everything she had heard about him. Damon, for his part, seemed to be studying her as much as the material in front of them, occasionally asking questions that had little to do with the assignment and everything to do with her past. Where had she transferred from? Why had she come to Silverclaw specifically? What had made her decide to stay quiet and avoid the social circles that dominated most of the academy? Elena answered carefully, revealing only as much as she felt comfortable sharing, but found herself surprised by how easy it was to talk to him once the initial tension had faded. He listened in a way that felt genuine, without the performative interest she had grown to expect from people trying to extract information for gossip. "You're different," Damon said eventually, closing his notebook and studying her across the table. "Different how?" Elena asked, feeling a flush of warmth she immediately tried to suppress. "You don't perform," he said simply. "Everyone else here, when they talk to me, there's always this layer of performance, like they're constantly aware of being watched, constantly adjusting themselves to seem more interesting or more desirable. You just talk like a normal person." Elena laughed softly. "Maybe that's because I don't know how to do the performance thing. I've never had to." "It's refreshing," Damon said, and something in his tone made Elena's heart beat a little faster than she wanted to admit. They continued their study session for another half hour before packing up their materials, agreeing to meet again later in the week to finalize their project. As Elena gathered her things, she noticed Damon watching her with an expression that lingered a moment too long, though he quickly looked away when she caught him. "Thanks for today," Elena said as they walked out of the study room together. "This was less painful than I expected." Damon smiled, a real smile this time, not the practiced version he offered to other students in the hallways. "Same," he said. "I will see you at the next session." Elena watched him walk away down the corridor, feeling a strange, unfamiliar warmth spreading through her chest. She told herself, again, that it meant nothing, that this was simply a school project, and nothing more. But some part of her, quiet and honest, knew that she was beginning to enjoy his company far more than she had expected to. Word of their study sessions spread quickly through the academy, exaggerated and distorted with each retelling. By the following morning, Elena heard whispers claiming she had been seen laughing with Damon in the library, that she had somehow charmed her way into his attention within days of arriving at the school. She tried to ignore the rumors, focusing instead on her classes and the quiet routine she was slowly building for herself. But avoiding attention entirely proved impossible. During lunch, she noticed Bianca watching her from across the courtyard, her expression cold and calculating, surrounded by her usual circle of followers. Elena met her gaze briefly before looking away, refusing to give Bianca the satisfaction of seeing her intimidated. Oliver joined her a few minutes later, setting his tray down with a look of concern. "You have officially become the most talked about person in school," he said. "Congratulations, I guess." "I didn't ask for this," Elena said, frustration creeping into her voice. "I just want to finish the project and go back to being invisible." "I don't think that is going to happen," Oliver said gently. "Not after yesterday." "Why? What happened yesterday?" Oliver hesitated before answering. "Someone saw you and Damon walking out of the library together, smiling. That is apparently enough to set off half the school." Elena groaned quietly, dropping her head into her hands for a moment, before straightening up again. "This is exactly what I was trying to avoid." "For what it is worth," Oliver said, "I do not think you did anything wrong. People are just desperate for something interesting to talk about, and you happen to be the newest thing." Elena appreciated his attempt at reassurance, though it did little to ease the growing unease settling in her chest. She had come to Silverclaw hoping to avoid exactly this kind of attention, and yet here she was, only a few days in, already at the center of a social drama she had never asked to be part of. Later that afternoon, as she made her way toward her next class, she found herself intercepted by Bianca and her group near the entrance to the science wing. Bianca's expression was pleasant on the surface, though Elena could sense the sharp edge underneath. "I heard your study sessions with Damon are going well," Bianca said, her tone deceptively light. "They are fine," Elena said carefully. "It is a school project." "Of course it is," Bianca said, smiling in a way that did not reach her eyes. "Just remember what I told you on your first day. Some things here have rules, whether people choose to acknowledge them or not." "I am not trying to break any rules," Elena said, keeping her voice steady, despite the tension building in her chest. "I am just doing an assignment. See that it stays that way. Bianca said, her smile sharpening slightly, before she turned and walked away, her followers trailing behind her like shadows. Elena stood there for a moment, unsettled by the exchange, before forcing herself to continue toward her class. She told herself that Bianca's warnings meant nothing, that she had no reason to feel intimidated by empty threats from a girl clinging to a status she had not actually earned through anything Elena had done. But as the day continued, she could not shake the feeling that she had stumbled into something far larger and more complicated than a simple school project, something involving history and rivalries she did not yet fully understand. She resolved to be more careful, to keep her interactions with Damon strictly professional, and to avoid giving anyone further reason to speculate about something that, as far as she was concerned, did not exist. That evening, sitting alone in her dormitory room, Elena found herself replaying the conversation from the study session, the ease of their laughter, the unexpected honesty in Damon's voice when he had admitted to feeling lonely, despite being surrounded by admirers. She told herself it was simply the natural result of two people finding common ground during a shared assignment. She almost believed it. Almost. Across the academy, in his own quarters, Damon sat by his window, staring out at the training fields below, his mind equally consumed by thoughts he could not quite organize into anything sensible. He had spent years perfecting the art of maintaining distance from everyone around him, protecting himself from the constant performance that came with being the Ashworth heir. Somehow, in the span of a single study session, Elena Voss had managed to slip past defenses he had spent years building, and he found himself both unsettled and, despite every instinct telling him to be careful, genuinely looking forward to seeing her again. By the end of the week, Elena had started to believe that things might settle down. The initial wave of gossip about her pairing with Damon had faded slightly, replaced by newer, more immediate distractions among the student body. She allowed herself to relax, focusing on her classes and the growing routine that made Silverclaw feel, for the first time, like a place she might actually survive. That sense of calm shattered on a quiet Thursday afternoon. Elena was walking toward the training fields for her mandatory conditioning class when she noticed a group of students gathered near the announcement board outside the main hall, whispering and pointing in her direction. Her stomach tightened immediately, the same instinct that had warned her of trouble before flaring up again now. She approached cautiously, and as the crowd parted slightly, she saw what had captured everyone's attention. A printed flyer had been posted on the board, professionally made, complete with a photograph of her and Damon standing close together outside the library, the very same afternoon of their first study session. Beneath the image, bold text declared that Elena Voss had been caught scheming to trap the Ashworth heir into a forced bond, using manipulation tactics learned from her mysterious and unknown past. Elena felt her face flush with a mixture of anger and humiliation as she read the words again, struggling to process how something so blatantly false had been constructed with such convincing detail. The photograph itself was innocent, a simple moment of two people leaving a study session together, but the accompanying text twisted it into something ugly and calculated. "This is absurd," she said aloud, her voice shaking slightly, despite her best efforts to remain composed. A girl standing nearby, one Elena did not recognize, glanced at her with obvious distaste. "Is it true?" the girl asked bluntly. "Are you really trying to trap him?" "No," Elena said firmly, though she could feel the weight of dozens of eyes now turning toward her, judgment already forming on many faces before she had even finished speaking. "This is completely made up." But the damage had already been done. By the time she reached her conditioning class, whispers followed her every step, and she could feel the shift in how people looked at her, no longer simply curious about the mysterious transfer student, but actively suspicious, even hostile. She spotted Oliver near the entrance to the training field, his expression grim as he waved her over. "I saw the flyer," he said quietly. "This is bad, Elena." "I didn't do anything," Elena said, her voice tight with frustration. "That photo is just us leaving the library. Someone twisted it into something it isn't." "I believe you," Oliver said, "but convincing everyone else is going to be harder." Elena closed her eyes briefly, trying to steady her breathing. Who would even do something like this? Oliver hesitated, glancing around before lowering his voice further. "I don't have proof, but it has Bianca's fingerprints all over it. This is exactly the kind of thing she has done before to other girls who got too close to Damon." The realization settled over Elena like a heavy weight. She had underestimated just how far Bianca might be willing to go to protect her perceived claim on Damon's attention, and now she found herself facing consequences for a connection she had never actively pursued in the first place. The conditioning class passed in a blur, Elena barely able to focus on the physical exercises as her mind raced through possibilities for how to address the situation. She considered confronting Bianca directly, but doubted it would accomplish anything beyond escalating the conflict further. She considered speaking to a professor, but worried that doing so might only draw more attention to something she desperately wanted to disappear. By the time classes ended for the day, the story had grown even more exaggerated, passed from student to student with new details added at each retelling. Some versions claimed Elena had been caught sneaking into Damon's private quarters. Others suggested she had used forbidden techniques from her unknown pack lineage to influence his emotions unfairly. None of it bore any resemblance to reality, but the truth seemed to matter less with each passing hour. Elena retreated to her dormitory room as soon as she could, grateful for the solitude after a day that had felt increasingly suffocating. She had barely settled onto her bed when a knock sounded at her door, hesitant but insistent. She opened it to find Damon standing in the hallway, his expression a mixture of anger and concern that immediately told her he had seen the flyer as well. "Can we talk?" he asked quietly. Elena stepped aside to let him in, though she remained near the door, unsure what to expect from the conversation. "I promise you, I had nothing to do with that flyer," she said before he could speak. "I don't know how anyone got that photo, and I definitely didn't write those lies." "I know," Damon said, his voice firm and immediate, leaving no room for doubt. "I never thought you did. I know exactly who is responsible for this." Elena studied his face, surprised by the certainty in his tone. "Bianca?" Damon nodded grimly. "She has done this before, to other girls who she felt were getting too close to me. It usually works because most people are too afraid to defend themselves against her family's influence." "So what do we do?" Elena asked, feeling a flicker of hope at the word we, though she quickly reminded herself not to read too much into a simple choice of pronoun. "I'm going to fix this," Damon said. "I should have addressed her behavior a long time ago, but I let it slide, because it was easier than dealing with the political fallout. I'm not letting that happen again, not when it's affecting someone who did nothing wrong." Elena felt a rush of gratitude mixed with something warmer, something she quickly pushed aside as inappropriate given the circumstances. "You don't have to fight my battles for me," she said. "I can handle myself." "I know you can," Damon said, his expression softening slightly. "But this isn't just your battle. She's using my name and my reputation to hurt you. That makes it my responsibility too." They talked for nearly an hour, discussing possible approaches to address the false accusations, and considering how best to counter the damage already done to Elena's reputation among the student body. Damon suggested speaking directly to the academy's headmaster, someone he trusted to handle the situation with appropriate discretion, while Elena worried that any official intervention might only draw more unwanted attention to the entire situation. Eventually, they agreed on a middle approach. Damon would speak privately with Bianca first, giving her a chance to remove the flyer and stop spreading the rumors before escalating things further. If she refused, they would involve the headmaster directly, with evidence of the fabricated claims to support their case. "Thank you," Elena said, as Damon prepared to leave, meaning it more sincerely than she expected. "For believing me, and for actually doing something about it, instead of just letting it happen." "Of course," Damon said, pausing at the door with an expression that lingered longer than strictly necessary. "I meant what I said before, Elena. This isn't just about protecting my reputation. I care about what happens to you specifically." The words hung in the air between them, heavier than either of them had probably intended, and for a moment, neither spoke, the silence charged with something neither was quite ready to name. Then Damon cleared his throat and stepped back, offering a small, almost shy smile, before turning and walking down the hallway. Elena closed the door behind him and leaned against it, her heart racing in a way that had nothing to do with the stress of the day's events. She told herself, once again, that this connection between them meant nothing beyond simple friendship born out of shared circumstance. But the more time passed, the harder that story became to believe, even to herself. The following morning, Elena arrived at breakfast to find the flyer had already been removed from the announcement board, though the rumors it had generated continued to circulate in whispered conversations throughout the dining hall. She kept her head down, focusing on her food, grateful when Oliver joined her a few minutes later with an update. Damon confronted Bianca this morning, Oliver said quietly. Apparently it got pretty heated. She denied everything, of course, but half the school saw them arguing near the training fields. Elena felt a mixture of relief and anxiety at the news. Did it help? Some people are starting to question the Flyers' credibility, Oliver said, but Bianca isn't the type to give up easily. I'd be careful if I were you. Elena appreciated the warning, though she found herself less afraid of Bianca's potential retaliation than she probably should have been. Something about Damon's willingness to stand up for her, to publicly challenge someone as socially powerful as Bianca on her behalf, had shifted something inside her, a growing sense that perhaps she was not as alone in this strange, hostile environment as she had initially believed. Their next scheduled study session took place that afternoon, and Elena arrived at the library nervous about how the events of the previous day might affect their dynamic. She needn't have worried. Damon greeted her with the same easy warmth as before, seemingly unbothered by the drama that had unfolded because of their association. "How are you holding up?" he asked, as they settled into their usual study room. "Better than yesterday," Elena admitted. "Thank you again for talking to Bianca. I know that probably wasn't easy." "It should have happened a long time ago," Damon said. "I let her get away with too much for too long, because I didn't want to deal with the political consequences of confronting her family directly. That was a mistake." They worked through their assignment for the next hour, the conversation flowing more naturally than either of their previous sessions, punctuated by moments of genuine laughter and increasingly personal questions that neither seemed inclined to avoid. Elena found herself sharing small details about her past she had not intended to reveal, comfortable in a way that both surprised and slightly worried her. Near the end of their session, Damon set down his pen and studied her with an expression more serious than the light-hearted tone of their previous exchange. "Can I ask you something personal?" he said. "Sure," Elena said, curiosity outweighing her usual caution. "Why did you transfer here without a PAC affiliation?" Damon asked gently. "I don't want to pry if it's something you'd rather not discuss, but I've noticed you get uncomfortable whenever the topic comes up, and I want you to know you can trust me if you ever want to talk about it." Elena hesitated, weighing how much of the truth she was willing to share. She had kept her past carefully guarded for years, wary of how people might react to the full story of what had happened to her family, but something about Damon's genuine concern, the absence of judgment in his tone, made her want to trust him more than she had trusted anyone in a long time. "It's complicated," she said finally. "My family's story isn't a happy one. I don't really talk about it, mostly because I'm afraid of how people will react once they know." "You don't have to tell me if you're not ready," Damon said. "But whenever you are, I'll listen." Elena felt a wave of emotion she had not expected, gratitude mixed with something warmer, something she was increasingly finding difficult to categorize as simple friendship. "Thank you," she said quietly. "That means more than you probably realize." They gathered their materials shortly after, the conversation shifting back to lighter topics as they prepared to leave the library. As they walked out together, Elena felt the familiar weight of curious eyes following them through the hallway, but for once, she found herself caring less about the judgment of others, and more about the quiet, growing connection developing between her and the alpha heir everyone had warned her to stay away from. She still did not fully understand what was happening between them, or where it might eventually lead, but she was beginning to suspect that whatever it was, it had already grown too significant to simply ignore, regardless of the rumors, the rivalries, or the rules that Bianca and others insisted still applied to someone in her position. 2 weeks passed, and Elena found herself settling into a rhythm at Silverclaw Academy that she had not thought possible during her first chaotic days there. The rumors surrounding the Flyer had mostly faded, replaced by newer distractions among the student body, though Bianca's cold glances across the courtyard never fully disappeared. Elena had learned to ignore them, focusing instead on her studies and the growing friendship, or whatever it was becoming, with Damon. Their study sessions had become a regular part of her week, scheduled twice, sometimes 3 times, depending on the demands of their shared project. What had started as a mandatory academic pairing had slowly transformed into something Elena looked forward to more than she was willing to admit, even to herself. On a quiet Tuesday evening, they met in their usual study room to finalize the research portion of their PAC trials presentation. Elena arrived early, spreading her notes across the table, and reviewing the material one final time before Damon joined her. He arrived looking more tired than usual, dark circles forming under his eyes that Elena had not noticed before. She set down her pen, studying him with concern. "Are you okay?" she asked. "You look exhausted." Damon rubbed his eyes and offered a tired smile. "Just some family pressure. Nothing unusual." Elena hesitated, unsure how far she could push without overstepping the careful boundaries they had established between them. "You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to," she said. "But if you need to vent, I'm here." Damon studied her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression, as he seemed to weigh how much he was willing to share. "My father has been putting a lot of pressure on me lately," he said finally. "About choosing a future mate, about securing alliances for the pack, about basically every decision I make, from now until I take over leadership. That sounds like a lot of pressure for someone our age," Elena said gently. "It is," Damon admitted. "Most people assume being the alpha heir means having everything handed to you. They don't see the constant expectations, the sense that every choice you make is being evaluated for its political value, rather than what actually makes you happy." Elena listened carefully, recognizing a vulnerability in his voice she had not heard before. "Is that why you seem so distant with everyone else here? Because you're worried about how it will look?" Damon nodded slowly. "Partly. It's easier to keep people at a distance than to risk them getting close to me for the wrong reasons. My father has certain expectations about who I should be seen with, and most of the girls here understand that dynamic perfectly. They compete for my attention because it comes with status and influence, not because they actually care about who I am underneath all that." "That must be lonely," Elena said, echoing the same words she had used during their very first conversation. Damon smiled, a small, genuine expression that reached his eyes this time. "You've said that to me before." "It's still true," Elena said softly. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the weight of his admission settling between them. Elena found herself wanting to reach across the table and offer some physical comfort, a hand on his arm, anything to convey the empathy she felt. But she held back, uncertain of the boundaries that still existed between them despite their growing closeness. "Can I ask you something?" Damon said eventually, breaking the silence. "Of course," Elena said. "Why haven't you asked me for anything?" he said. "Every other girl here who gets close to me eventually asks for something, whether it's an introduction to my father, a favor with the pack council, or just public recognition of the connection. You've never asked me for anything." Elena considered the question carefully. "I don't want anything from you," she said honestly. "I just enjoy talking to you. That's it." Something in Damon's expression softened even further, a warmth spreading across his features that made Elena's heart skip slightly. "That might be the most refreshing thing anyone has ever said to me," he said quietly. They returned to their project work shortly after, though the atmosphere between them felt different now, charged with an unspoken understanding that had not existed before. Elena found herself stealing glances at him throughout the remainder of their session, noticing small details she had not paid attention to previously, the way he chewed the end of his pen when concentrating, the way his brow furrowed slightly when he encountered a difficult passage in their research materials. As their session drew to a close, Damon set down his notebook and looked at her with an expression more serious than before. "Elena," he said, "I need to tell you something, and I'm not entirely sure how to say it." Elena's heart began to race, uncertain what he intended to share. "Okay," she said cautiously. "I've been thinking about you a lot," Damon said, his voice quieter than usual. "More than I probably should, given everything happening around us. I know the timing isn't great, with the flyer and Bianca and everything else, but I wanted you to know that." Elena felt a flush of warmth spreading through her chest, matched by a nervous flutter she had been trying to suppress for weeks. "I've been thinking about you too," she admitted, the words escaping, before she could second-guess herself. Damon's expression shifted into something like relief, a small smile forming at the corner of his mouth. "That's good to hear," he said. "I was worried I was imagining things." "You weren't," Elena said softly. They sat there for a long moment, the unspoken tension between them finally acknowledged, though neither seemed quite ready to take the next step toward whatever this growing connection might become. Elena knew, rationally, that pursuing anything further would only complicate her already precarious position at the academy, drawing even more unwanted attention from Bianca and others who considered Damon's affection a prize to be competed for, rather than a genuine choice he was entitled to make. But sitting there, watching him look at her, with an expression of genuine warmth and interest, she found it increasingly difficult to care about the potential consequences. "We should probably be careful," Elena said eventually, breaking the silence. "About how this looks to other people, I mean." Damon nodded, though something in his expression suggested reluctance. "I know," he said. "I don't want to make things harder for you than they already are." "It's not just that," Elena said. "It's also about protecting whatever this is, keeping it from becoming another piece of gossip that everyone dissects and distorts before either of us has a chance to figure out what it actually means." "That makes sense," Damon said. "We can take things slowly." "I'm not in any rush, Elena. I just wanted you to know how I feel, whatever happens next." They gathered their materials and left the study room together, walking in comfortable silence through the quiet evening hallways of the academy. As they reached the point where their paths would normally diverge, Damon paused, turning to face her with an expression that lingered between them, charged with unspoken possibility. "Good night, Elena," he said softly. "Good night, Damon," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. He hesitated a moment longer, as though considering something further, before offering a small smile and turning to walk toward his own dormitory. Elena watched him go, her heart still racing from the conversation, before making her own way back to her room, her mind spinning with everything that had just transpired between them. Over the following days, their dynamic shifted subtly but unmistakably. Their study sessions took on a new dimension, filled with lingering glances and conversations that stretched longer than strictly necessary for their academic work. They began finding excuses to spend time together outside their scheduled sessions as well, brief encounters in the library, shared meals in quieter corners of the dining hall away from the usual crowds. Elena knew, on some level, that they could not keep this hidden forever, that eventually the rest of the academy would notice the change in their relationship and respond accordingly. But for now, she allowed herself to simply enjoy the growing connection, savoring moments of genuine happiness that felt increasingly rare in her complicated life at Silverclaw. Oliver noticed the shift as well, commenting on it during one of their shared lunches. "You seem happier lately," he observed, studying her with a knowing expression. Elena felt her cheeks warm slightly. "I don't know what you mean," she said, though her tone lacked conviction. "Sure you don't," Oliver said, a teasing smile playing at his lips. "Just be careful, Elena. I'm happy for you, genuinely, but Bianca isn't going to let this go easily if she figures out what's happening." "I know," Elena said, her expression sobering slightly. "We're being careful. Mostly." "Mostly isn't the same as completely," Oliver warned. "Just watch your back. This school has a way of making private things public before anyone's ready for that." Elena appreciated his concern, though she found herself unable to fully heed his warning, too caught up in the growing warmth of her connection with Damon to prioritize caution over genuine happiness. She told herself they would deal with any consequences when they arose, that for now, she deserved this small measure of joy amid the complicated circumstances surrounding her arrival at the academy. She had no way of knowing, as she walked away from that conversation, just how quickly and dramatically those consequences were about to arrive. The letter arrived on a gray Wednesday morning, tucked inside an unmarked envelope slipped beneath Elena's dormitory door sometime during the night. She found it when she woke, her name written across the front in careful, unfamiliar handwriting, and something about its presence immediately unsettled her before she had even opened it. She sat on the edge of her bed and broke the seal, unfolding a single sheet of paper covered in dense, formal script. As she read the first few lines, her hands began to tremble, the words on the page pulling her back into a past she had spent years trying to bury. The letter identified itself as coming from a representative of the Ashworth Pax Council, though it bore no official seal that Elena recognized. It stated, in careful and deliberate language, that Elena Voss's true identity had been discovered, and that her family's history was far more significant and far more dangerous than she had allowed anyone at the academy to believe. Elena's birth pack, the letter explained, had been the Wraithmore pack, a smaller but historically respected pack that had maintained a fragile alliance with several larger territories, including, at one point, the Ashworth pack itself. Years ago, when Elena was still a small child, the Wraithmore pack had been destroyed in a coordinated attack. Its members killed or scattered. Its territory absorbed by a faction known as the Grim Hollow Coalition, a group with a long history of expanding their influence through violence and manipulation. Elena had been hidden and protected in the aftermath, raised under a false identity by distant relatives, who understood that revealing her true heritage would make her a target for the same forces that had destroyed her family. She had grown up believing she understood the broad outlines of this history, though she had never known the specific names or details the letter now laid out before her. What she had not known, what the letter now revealed with startling clarity, was that the Grim Hollow Coalition had recently resumed contact with several established packs, including, disturbingly, elements within the Ashworth Pack's own council, seeking new alliances and territorial agreements that would further consolidate their power. Elena set the letter down, her mind racing as she tried to process the implications. If this information was accurate, it meant that Damon's own father, the current alpha of the Ashworth Pack, might be engaged in secret negotiations with the very faction responsible for destroying her family. It also meant that her presence at Silverclaw Academy, seemingly coincidental, might not be as random as she had always believed. She spent the rest of the morning in a daze, barely registering her classes, her mind consumed by questions she had no way of answering. Had someone deliberately arranged for her to transfer here? Did the Academy's administration know about her true heritage? And most troubling of all, did Damon know anything about his father's dealings with the Grim Hollow Coalition? By the time she reached their scheduled study session that afternoon, Elena had decided she needed to confront Damon directly, regardless of how their growing connection might be affected by the conversation. She arrived at their usual study room with the letter folded carefully in her bag, her heart pounding with anxiety. Damon noticed her tension immediately. "What's wrong?" he asked, setting down his books and studying her with obvious concern. Elena hesitated, unsure how to begin, before finally pulling the letter from her bag and sliding it across the table toward him. "I need you to read this," she said quietly, "and I need you to be honest with me about anything you might know." Damon read the letter slowly, his expression shifting from confusion to shock, and finally to something that looked like genuine horror, as he reached the final lines. He set the paper down carefully, his hands not quite steady. "Elena," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I had no idea. I swear to you, I had absolutely no idea about any of this. Do you know anything about your father's dealings with the Grim Hollow Coalition?" Elena asked, watching his face carefully for any sign of deception. Damon shook his head slowly. "I know my father has been in secretive negotiations lately, meetings I haven't been included in, discussions that seemed to make several of the Pack Council members uncomfortable, but I never knew who he was negotiating with, or why." Elena felt a complicated mixture of relief and renewed anxiety at his answer. She believed him, believed the genuine shock reflected in his expression, but his ignorance did nothing to resolve the larger, more dangerous situation now unfolding around them both. "What does this mean?" Elena asked, her voice smaller than she intended. "If your father is really negotiating with the people responsible for destroying my family, what happens to me? What happens to us?" Damon reached across the table, taking her hand in his for the first time since they had known each other, his grip firm and reassuring, despite the uncertainty clearly written across his own face. "I don't know," he admitted honestly, "but I promise you, whatever my father is planning, I will not let it hurt you. I don't care what political consequences that brings." Elena felt tears threatening at the corner of her eyes, overwhelmed by the weight of everything unfolding around her, the danger she had spent years trying to escape, now resurfacing, in the most unexpected and complicated way possible. "I'm scared," she admitted quietly, allowing herself a rare moment of vulnerability. "I know," Damon said softly, "but you're not facing this alone anymore. Whatever happens next, we'll figure it out together." They spent the remainder of their study session discussing possible next steps, though neither could arrive at a clear plan, given how little concrete information they actually possessed. Damon suggested cautiously approaching one of the more trustworthy members of his father's council, someone who might be willing to provide additional context without alerting his father to the fact that his secret negotiations had been discovered. Elena, meanwhile, worried about the source of the letter itself. Someone had gone through considerable effort to research her true heritage and deliver this warning anonymously, which raised troubling questions about who else might know her secret, and what their intentions might be in revealing it now, at this particular moment. "Do you think this could be a trap?" Elena asked, voicing a fear that had been building throughout their conversation. "Someone trying to manipulate us into a certain reaction?" Damon considered this carefully. "It's possible," he said. "But even if it is, the underlying information seems too specific to be entirely fabricated. Whoever sent this either has genuine access to sensitive information or wants us to believe they do, which is dangerous either way." They agreed, eventually, that their best course of action was to gather more information before taking any drastic steps, being careful not to alert anyone, including Damon's father, that they had uncovered this troubling connection. Elena felt a small measure of comfort in having a plan, however incomplete, and in having Damon firmly beside her, rather than distanced by the complicated politics surrounding his family's position. As they prepared to leave the study room that evening, Damon paused at the door, turning to face her with an expression more serious than she had seen from him before. "Elena," he said, "I need you to know something. Whatever happens with my father, whatever political consequences arise from this, my feelings for you haven't changed. If anything, they've only grown stronger, knowing what you've survived, and how much strength it took to build the life you have now." Elena felt her heart swell with emotion, the weight of his words settling over her like a warm blanket against the cold uncertainty of everything else happening around them. "Thank you," she said softly, "for believing me, and for standing by me even when things are getting complicated." "Always," Damon said simply, and the sincerity in his voice left no room for doubt. They parted ways for the evening, though Elena found sleep elusive that night, her mind churning through the implications of the letter, and everything it suggested about the dangerous web of history and politics she had unwittingly stumbled into, simply by transferring to Silverclaw Academy. She thought about her birth pack, the Wraithmore, people she barely remembered but whose loss had shaped every aspect of her guarded, cautious existence since childhood. She thought too about Damon, about the surprising depth of loyalty and care he had shown her since the moment they first met, care that seemed to have nothing to do with status or political advantage, and everything to do with genuine affection. Whatever danger lay ahead, she found herself increasingly grateful that she would not have to face it entirely alone. Elsewhere in the academy, in a private study connected to his father's temporary quarters during his visit to the school, Damon sat awake long into the night, staring at a copy of documents he had quietly retrieved from his father's briefcase, while the older man slept. The papers confirmed his worst fears: detailed negotiations between the Ashworth Pack Council and representatives of the Grim Hollow Coalition, discussions of territorial boundaries and resource sharing that made no mention of the Coalition's violent history, as though that history had been conveniently forgotten in pursuit of political and economic advantage. Damon felt a cold anger settling in his chest as he read through the documents, understanding now the true scope of what he and Elena were facing. His own father, a man he had spent years respecting and striving to please, was in business with the very faction responsible for the massacre of an entire pack, a massacre that had left the woman Damon was falling for, orphaned, hidden, and living in constant fear of discovery. He knew, sitting there in the quiet darkness of that study, that he faced an impossible choice looming somewhere in the near future: loyalty to his family, his pack, and the inheritance he had spent his entire life preparing to accept, or loyalty to the girl who had somehow managed to become more important to him than any of those things combined. He did not yet know which choice he would ultimately make, but he knew, with absolute certainty, that he would not allow his father's secret alliances to bring harm to Elena, regardless of what price that protection might eventually demand of him. Bianca Sterling had not survived years of academy politics by acting rashly, and she did not intend to start now. The failed flyer campaign had taught her a valuable lesson, that clumsy fabrications could be too easily dismissed, especially once Damon himself stepped in to defend Elena's reputation. This time, she decided, her plan would be more elaborate, more convincing, and far harder to disprove. She had spent nearly 2 weeks gathering pieces for her scheme, recruiting the help of a few carefully chosen allies who owed her favors substantial enough that refusal was not a realistic option. Among them was Priya, a quiet but resourceful girl skilled in academy administrative systems, and Felicity, whose sharp tongue and talent for public performance made her the perfect instrument for what Bianca had planned. The scheme centered on the Academy's upcoming Founders' Assembly, a formal gathering held in the main hall where the entire student body would be present, along with several visiting PAC representatives, including, crucially, Damon's father. Bianca understood that a public spectacle carried far more weight than private rumors, and she intended to use that assembly to permanently end whatever connection had been developing between Elena and the heir she considered rightfully hers. The morning of the assembly arrived, with an unusual tension hanging over the Academy. Elena, unaware of Bianca's carefully constructed plan, dressed in her formal uniform, and made her way toward the main hall alongside Oliver, discussing lighter topics, in an attempt to distract herself from the lingering anxiety of the letter she had received weeks earlier. "You look nervous," Oliver observed, as they took their seats among the rows of students. "I always feel nervous at these formal events," Elena admitted. "Too many people watching, too many expectations about how everyone is supposed to behave." "Just get through it," Oliver said encouragingly. "These things are usually boring enough that no one pays attention for very long." Elena appreciated his attempt at reassurance, though she had no way of knowing how spectacularly wrong his prediction would prove to be. The assembly began normally enough, with the headmaster delivering opening remarks about academic achievement and PAC unity, followed by presentations from several student representatives about ongoing projects and initiatives. Elena settled into her seat, gradually relaxing as the routine proceedings unfolded without incident. Then Felicity rose from her seat, requesting permission to address the assembly regarding what she described as a matter of significant concern for the Academy's integrity. The headmaster, caught off guard but unwilling to publicly deny such a request in front of visiting dignitaries, granted permission somewhat reluctantly. Elena felt her stomach drop the moment Felicity began speaking, her voice carrying clearly through the hall's acoustics, dripping with false concern and manufactured sincerity. "I feel obligated to share something troubling that has come to my attention," Felicity announced, her eyes flicking briefly toward Elena before continuing. "It concerns the true intentions behind a certain new student's rapid rise in social standing since arriving at Silverclaw." Whispers immediately spread through the assembled crowd, heads turning toward Elena with renewed curiosity and suspicion. Elena felt her face flush, her heart racing as she realized, with growing horror, exactly where this was heading. "I have obtained information," Felicity continued, suggesting that Elena Voss has deliberately misrepresented her background to manipulate her way into Damon Ashworth's confidence, using knowledge of certain sensitive family connections to pressure him into a bond he would never otherwise consider. The accusation hung in the air, deliberately vague enough to sound damning, while lacking any specific detail that could be immediately disproven. Elena felt panic rising in her chest as she realized the true genius and cruelty of Bianca's scheme. By framing her actions as manipulative rather than simply providing false information, Felicity had constructed an accusation that fed directly into the very real, sensitive circumstances surrounding Elena's family history, twisting genuine tragedy into a weapon. "That's not true," Elena said, rising from her seat, her voice shaking despite her efforts to remain composed. "I have never manipulated anyone, and I have never used my family's history for any kind of personal gain." "Then perhaps you can explain," Felicity said smoothly, clearly having anticipated this response, "why you specifically transferred to Silverclaw Academy shortly after learning of connections between your birth pack and the Ashworth Family Council." Elena's blood ran cold. There was no way Felicity should have known those details. Details Elena had only recently learned herself from the anonymous letter. Someone had either intercepted that letter, or had access to information even more extensive than what had been shared with her. Before Elena could formulate a response, Damon rose from his own seat several rows ahead, his expression a mixture of controlled fury and protective determination that silenced the murmuring crowd almost instantly. "That's enough," he said, his voice carrying an authority that immediately commanded the room's attention. "Whatever accusations you're attempting to make, Felicity, they're built on manipulated half-truths designed to hurt someone who has done nothing but try to survive in an environment that has treated her unfairly since the day she arrived." "I'm simply raising legitimate concerns," Felicity said, though her confidence had visibly wavered under Damon's direct challenge. "You're doing exactly what Bianca asked you to do," Damon said flatly, turning to look directly at Bianca, who sat rigid in her seat, her carefully composed expression cracking slightly under the weight of public exposure. I know precisely who orchestrated this, and I think everyone here deserves to know the truth, rather than the fabricated narrative you're presenting." The room fell into stunned silence as Damon continued, methodically dismantling the accusation, piece by piece. He explained, without revealing any of the sensitive details from Elena's actual family history, that her transfer to the academy had occurred through standard administrative processes, verified by academy records that any of the visiting officials could confirm. He acknowledged the growing connection between himself and Elena honestly, without shame or hesitation, framing it not as manipulation, but as a genuine friendship that had developed naturally over shared academic work and mutual respect. "I have never once felt pressured or manipulated by Elena," Damon said firmly, his eyes finding hers across the crowded hall, offering silent reassurance amid the chaos. "If anything, she has been the one person here who never asked me for anything, who never tried to leverage a connection with me for status or advantage. The accusations being made today say far more about the person making them than about the person they're targeting." A murmur of agreement rippled through portions of the crowd. Students who had grown increasingly skeptical of Bianca's tactics over the years, finally finding the courage to voice their own doubts about the legitimacy of the accusations. The headmaster, visibly uncomfortable with how the assembly had derailed, stepped forward to formally close the discussion, promising a private investigation into the matter while dismissing the assembly for the day. As students filed out of the hall, whispering among themselves about the dramatic confrontation they had just witnessed, Elena remained frozen in her seat, overwhelmed by the public spectacle and the lingering fear that whoever had leaked information about her family history might pose a far greater threat than simple academy gossip. Damon made his way through the dispersing crowd to reach her, his expression softening with concern as he took the seat beside her. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly. "I don't know," Elena admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "How did Felicity know about the connection between my birth pack and your family's council? I only just learned about that myself, from an anonymous letter." Damon's expression darkened, with the same realization dawning on Elena. "Someone leaked that information deliberately," he said, "which means whoever is behind this isn't just interested in academy gossip. They're playing a much larger game." Elena felt a chill settle over her despite the warmth of the crowded hall. "Do you think Bianca is connected to the Grim Hollow Coalition somehow?" "I don't know," Damon admitted, "but I intend to find out. This has gone beyond simple social rivalry. Someone is using very real, very dangerous information as a weapon, and we need to understand why before it escalates any further." They spent the remainder of the day together, quietly investigating potential connections between Bianca's family and the political dealings Damon had uncovered in his father's documents. Their search yielded few concrete answers, though it deepened their suspicion that the various threats surrounding Elena, the anonymous letter, the fabricated accusations, and the leaked family history, were all connected to something far larger and more dangerous than mere academy drama. That evening, as they sat together in the quiet corner of the library, where their relationship had first begun to deepen, Damon reached for Elena's hand, holding it gently between his own. "I meant everything I said today," he told her, "about trusting you, about believing in you, about caring for you beyond any political consideration." "Thank you for defending me," Elena said softly, "in front of everyone, especially your father's associates. That couldn't have been easy." "It was the easiest decision I've ever made," Damon said, his voice steady with conviction. "Whatever comes next, whatever dangers we're facing, I want you to know that I choose you, Elena, regardless of the consequences." Elena felt tears welling in her eyes, overwhelmed by the sincerity of his declaration amid the growing chaos surrounding them both. "I choose you too," she whispered, the words carrying weight far beyond their simple meaning, a promise made in the midst of uncertainty and danger that neither of them fully understood yet, but both were determined to face together. In the days following the assembly, something shifted permanently within Silverclaw Academy's social landscape. News of Damon's public defense of Elena spread rapidly, and while some students remained suspicious, following Bianca's lead out of loyalty or fear, many others began treating Elena with a newfound respect, impressed by her composure under such intense public scrutiny, and curious about a connection significant enough to make the alpha heir abandon his usual careful neutrality. Elena found the shift disorienting at first. She had spent weeks trying to remain invisible, and now she found herself the subject of genuine, if cautious, interest from students who had previously ignored her entirely. Oliver, delighted by the change, teased her relentlessly about her sudden popularity. "You've officially become interesting," he said one afternoon, as they walked together toward the training fields. "People actually want to talk to you now, instead of just gossiping about you from a distance." "I'm not sure that's an improvement," Elena said, though she couldn't help smiling at his teasing tone. "Trust me, it is," Oliver said. "Being talked about is exhausting. Being genuinely liked is much better." Elena appreciated his perspective, though her mind remained largely occupied with more pressing concerns than her shifting social standing. The mystery surrounding the anonymous letter, and the deeply troubling question of how Felicity had gained access to such sensitive information, continued to weigh heavily on her thoughts, even as her connection with Damon deepened in ways she found increasingly difficult to resist. Their relationship, no longer confined to careful secrecy, blossomed openly over the following weeks. They spent time together outside their academic obligations now, walking through the academy's extensive gardens in the evenings, sharing meals in the dining hall without concern for who might notice, studying together, not merely for their shared project, but simply because they enjoyed each other's company. Elena found herself sharing more of her past with him during these quieter moments, details about her childhood in hiding, the constant vigilance instilled in her by the relatives who raised her, the loneliness of growing up without any real connection to the pack heritage that should have been her birthright. Damon listened with genuine attentiveness, never pushing her to reveal more than she was ready to share, offering comfort and understanding that felt entirely free of judgment. In turn, Damon opened up about pressures Elena had only glimpsed before, the crushing weight of expectation that came with being the sole heir to one of the region's most powerful packs, the loneliness of never knowing whether people's affection was genuine or merely strategic, the complicated relationship with his father that had grown increasingly strained as Damon learned more about the older man's secret political dealings. "I used to think being alpha heir meant having everything," Damon admitted one evening, as they sat together beneath one of the garden's ancient oak trees, the sunset painting the sky in shades of orange and purple above them. "Now I realize it mostly means being trapped by other people's expectations, constantly performing a role I never really chose for myself." "You could choose differently," Elena said gently. "You don't have to accept every expectation placed on you." "It's not that simple," Damon said, though his tone lacked conviction, as though he were beginning to question assumptions he had held his entire life. "My father has spent years preparing me for this role. Refusing it would mean disappointing him, disrupting the entire structure of pack succession that everyone has come to expect." "But would it make you happy?" Elena asked. "Following that path, accepting whatever alliance your father eventually arranges for you, living the rest of your life performing a role that was chosen for you rather than something you actually want?" Damon considered her question for a long moment, his expression thoughtful and slightly troubled. "I don't know," he admitted finally. "I used to think I did, but the more time I spend with you, the more I realize how much of my life has been shaped by expectation, rather than genuine desire." Elena felt her heart swell with emotion at his honesty, recognizing the vulnerability it took for someone in his position to admit such doubts, even to someone he trusted. "For what it's worth," she said softly, "I think you deserve to choose your own path, whatever that ends up looking like." Damon turned to look at her then, his expression softening into something unmistakably tender. "I've never wanted anyone the way I want you," he said quietly. "Not for status, not for alliance, not for any of the reasons my father would consider strategically valuable, just because being with you feels like the first genuinely honest thing in my entire life." Elena felt tears threatening at the corners of her eyes, overwhelmed by the sincerity of his confession. "I feel the same way," she admitted. "I never expected to find anything real here, especially not with someone in your position. But you've become the one constant thing I actually trust in this entire academy." They sat together in comfortable silence as the sun finished setting, the weight of their mutual confession settling gently between them, transforming what had begun as a reluctant academic pairing into something neither of them had anticipated, but both now recognized as significant, perhaps even permanent. Their growing closeness did not go unnoticed by others at the academy, and while Bianca's influence had weakened considerably following the failed assembly scheme, she had not entirely given up her campaign against Elena. Elena continued to notice subtle signs of ongoing hostility, whispered comments in hallways, occasional cold glances across the dining hall, though nothing as dramatic as the previous confrontations. Oliver, ever perceptive, warned Elena to remain vigilant despite the apparent lull in overt hostility. Bianca doesn't give up easily, he cautioned during one of their shared study sessions. She's probably just regrouping, waiting for a better opportunity to strike again. Elena appreciated the warning, though she found herself less consumed by fear of Bianca's schemes, and more focused on the deepening danger surrounding her family's history, and the mysterious source of information that had leaked such sensitive details to Felicity. She and Damon had continued their quiet investigation into the connection between Bianca's family and the Grim Hollow Coalition, though their efforts had yielded frustratingly few concrete answers. What they did discover, piecing together fragments of information from careful conversations with trusted allies and subtle research into PAC political history, was troubling enough to demand serious attention. Bianca's family, it turned out, maintained long-standing trade relationships with several territories under Grim Hollow influence, relationships that predated even Damon's father's recent negotiations. Whether this connection was directly responsible for the leaked information, or merely coincidental given the complicated web of alliances that governed PAC politics in the region, remained unclear. "We need to be careful," Damon said one evening as they reviewed their findings together, in the privacy of the library's most secluded study room. "If Bianca's family has genuine ties to the coalition, then her campaign against you might be more than simple jealousy over my attention. It could be part of something much larger." Elena felt the familiar chill of fear settling over her at this possibility, the sense that she had transferred into a situation far more dangerous and complicated than she had ever imagined. "Do you think she knows about my connection to the Wraithmore Pack specifically?" she asked, "or is she just being used as a tool by people with more direct knowledge of the situation?" "I honestly don't know," Damon admitted. "But either way, we need to find out before the upcoming PAC trials. If the Grim Hollow Coalition is genuinely trying to locate the last surviving heir of the Wraithmore Pack, using this academy and its political dynamics as cover, the trials would provide the perfect opportunity for them to make a definitive move." The mention of the PAC trials, an event Elena had been anxiously anticipating for weeks as part of their academic requirements, sent a fresh wave of anxiety through her chest. The trials represented the culmination of the academic year, a large-scale competitive event drawing spectators and participants from PACs across the entire region, precisely the kind of large, chaotic gathering that would provide ample opportunity for anyone seeking to exploit the situation without immediate detection. "We need a plan," Elena said, her voice steady despite the fear building within her. "If there's a genuine possibility that someone intends to use the trials as an opportunity to target me, we can't simply wait for it to happen." Damon nodded in agreement, his expression hardening with the same determination Elena had come to associate with his fiercest moments of protectiveness. "I agree," he said. "I'll speak with some contacts within my father's council, carefully, without revealing our specific concerns. Perhaps we can arrange additional security measures for the trials, without drawing unwanted attention to why we believe them necessary." They spent the remainder of the evening formulating a careful strategy, discussing potential precautions, identifying trusted allies who might be willing to help without asking too many probing questions. Despite the underlying tension of their situation, Elena found herself grateful, once again, for Damon's unwavering support, his willingness to face whatever dangers lay ahead, alongside her, rather than retreating into the safety of his privileged position. As their planning session drew to a close, Damon reached across the table, taking her hand gently in his own. "Whatever happens during the trials," he said, his voice quiet but resolute, "I promise you, I will not let anything happen to you. We'll face this together, exactly as we've faced everything else." Elena squeezed his hand in return, drawing strength from his steady presence, despite the uncertainty and danger looming ahead. "Together," she agreed softly, allowing herself to believe, at least for this moment, that whatever challenges awaited them during the upcoming trials, they would find a way through them, side by side. The confrontation with Damon's father arrived sooner than either of them expected, forced by circumstances neither could have fully anticipated. Alpha Gareth Ashworth had returned to the academy for a scheduled review of the upcoming PAC trials preparations, and Damon, growing increasingly desperate for answers about his father's dealings with the Grim Hollow Coalition, decided the time had come to confront him directly, regardless of the risk involved. He found his father alone in the visiting quarters reserved for PAC leadership, reviewing documents spread across a wide desk near the window. Gareth looked up as Damon entered, his expression shifting immediately into the careful, assessing look he reserved for discussions he suspected might prove contentious. "Son," Gareth said, setting down his papers, "I wasn't expecting you until dinner." "We need to talk," Damon said, closing the door behind him with deliberate care. "About your negotiations with the Grim Hollow Coalition." Gareth's expression hardened instantly, though he maintained his composure with the practiced control of someone accustomed to difficult political discussions. "That's a sensitive matter, Damon, not something to be discussed casually." "I'm not asking casually," Damon said, his voice firm, despite the nervous energy building in his chest. "I know about the meetings, the documents, the territorial negotiations. What I don't understand is why you would align our pack with the same faction responsible for destroying the Wraithmore pack." Something flickered across Gareth's face, surprise mixed with calculation, as he studied his son with renewed attention. "Where did you learn about the Wraithmore connection?" he asked carefully. "Does it matter?" Damon replied. "What matters is whether it's true. Is our pack genuinely negotiating alliances with the people who committed that massacre?" Gareth was quiet for a long moment, weighing his response carefully, before finally sighing, the careful political mask slipping, to reveal genuine weariness underneath. "The situation is more complicated than you understand," he said. "The Grim Hollow Coalition has grown significantly in power over the past several years. Refusing their proposed alliance would mean risking direct conflict our pack is not currently prepared to win. So we're supposed to simply accept an alliance with people who commit massacres, because standing against them would be inconvenient?" Damon asked, anger creeping into his voice, despite his efforts to remain composed. "It's not about convenience," Gareth said sharply. "It's about survival, about protecting the thousands of pack members who depend on my leadership for their safety and well-being. Sometimes leadership requires making difficult compromises that younger, more idealistic people struggle to understand." "And what happens to the survivors of the Wraithmore pack in this compromise?" Damon asked pointedly. "The people whose families were destroyed by the very faction you're now negotiating with." Gareth studied his son carefully, something shifting in his expression as understanding began to dawn. "This is about the girl," he said slowly. "The new student, Elena Voss." Damon felt his stomach tighten at his father's sudden realization, though he refused to back down from the confrontation now that it had begun. "Her name is Elena," he said firmly. "And yes, she is connected to this. She's the last surviving heir of the Wraithmore pack, hiding here, under an assumed identity for her own protection." Gareth's expression grew troubled, a complicated mixture of concern and calculation that Damon found difficult to interpret. "Damon," he said carefully, "you need to understand the full scope of what's at stake here. If the Grim Hollow Coalition discovers that a Wraithmore heir is alive and hidden within our territory, the political ramifications could be catastrophic, for our pack and for her. Then help me protect her," Damon said, "instead of negotiating with the people who want her dead." "It's not that simple," Gareth said, his voice heavy with the weight of political reality. "The negotiations have progressed too far to simply abandon them without triggering significant retaliation. I need time to find a way to protect the girl, without jeopardizing everything our pack has built." "How much time?" Damon asked, skepticism evident in his tone. "I don't know," Gareth admitted honestly, "but I promise you, I have no intention of allowing an innocent girl to be harmed simply to secure political advantage. Whatever else you think of me, Damon, I am not that kind of leader." Damon studied his father for a long moment, uncertain whether to trust this sudden reassurance, given everything else he had discovered about the secret negotiations. "I want to believe you," he said finally, "but I need proof that you're actually taking steps to protect her, not just words." Gareth nodded slowly, seeming to understand his son's hesitation. "I'll arrange additional security measures for the upcoming pack trials," he said, discreetly, without drawing attention to why they're necessary. "And I'll begin quietly extracting our pack from the more dangerous aspects of the Grim Hollow negotiations, though it will take time to do so without triggering immediate conflict." It was not the immediate resolution Damon had hoped for, but it represented more progress than he had expected given the complicated political realities his father had described. He left the conversation with a cautious sense of hope, tempered by the understanding that significant danger remained, particularly given how little time they had before the pack trials would begin. He found Elena later that evening in their usual study room, relaying the details of his conversation with his father, as she listened with a mixture of relief and continued anxiety. "Do you believe him?" she asked, once he had finished. "I want to," Damon said honestly. "But I'm not naive enough to think this resolves everything immediately. We still need to be careful, especially during the trials." Elena nodded, her expression thoughtful, as she processed the new information. "At least now we know he's aware of the situation, and apparently willing to help rather than simply prioritizing political advantage over basic decency." "That's something," Damon agreed. "Though it doesn't address the more immediate question of who leaked information about your family history to Felicity, or whether Bianca's family connections to the coalition pose a direct threat." They spent the remainder of the evening reviewing their preparations for the upcoming trials, discussing contingency plans should anything go wrong during the large-scale event. Elena found herself grateful for Damon's steady presence throughout the growing complexity of their situation, appreciating his willingness to confront his own father, despite the significant personal and political risk involved. As their planning session drew toward its conclusion, a knock sounded at the study room door, unexpected given the late hour. Elena felt a flutter of anxiety as Damon rose to answer it, relaxing slightly when she recognized the visitor as one of Damon's more trusted friends among the academy's senior students, a young man named Nathaniel, who occasionally assisted with pack council matters. "Sorry to interrupt," Nathaniel said, glancing between them with an expression of controlled urgency. "But I think you need to see this immediately." He held out a folded piece of paper, which Damon accepted with visible apprehension. As he unfolded it and began reading, his expression shifted rapidly, from confusion to alarm, his grip tightening on the paper's edges. "What is it?" Elena asked, her own anxiety spiking at his obvious distress. Damon looked up at her, his expression grave. "It's a formal notice from the Grim Hollow Coalition," he said quietly. "Addressed to my father, requesting a meeting during the pack trials to discuss finalizing their proposed alliance. And there's a specific clause here regarding the identification and handling of any remaining Wraithmore pack members discovered within Allied territories." Elena felt the blood drain from her face, the abstract danger they had been discussing suddenly crystallizing into something immediate and terrifyingly concrete. "They know I'm here," she whispered, her voice trembling. "We don't know that for certain," Damon said quickly, though his own expression suggested he found little comfort in this uncertainty. This could simply be standard language, included in any territorial negotiation of this kind. "Or it could mean exactly what it appears to mean," Elena said, panic creeping into her voice. "That someone has already informed them about my presence here, and they're using the trials as an opportunity to formalize whatever plans they have for dealing with me." Nathaniel, who had remained quiet during this exchange, finally spoke up. "There's more," he said carefully. "The coalition has specifically requested that additional representatives be permitted to attend the trials as observers, citing interest in evaluating potential future students for their own affiliated academies." The implication hung heavy in the air between them. If Grim Hollow representatives would be present during the trials, disguised as simple observers, the danger to Elena's safety became immediate and undeniable, transforming what had been a looming, abstract threat into a concrete crisis requiring urgent action. "We need to tell my father immediately," Damon said, already moving toward the door. "And we need to develop a real plan, not just cautious hopes that everything will work out. Elena's safety cannot depend on vague promises anymore." Elena rose from her seat, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and grim determination. "Whatever happens," she said, her voice steadier than she felt, "I'm not running away from this. I've spent my entire life hiding from the people who destroyed my family. I'm done hiding." Damon turned to look at her, admiration and concern warring in his expression. "We'll face it together," he said firmly. "Whatever it takes." Together, they left the study room to find Gareth, the weight of the impending pack trials, now carrying far more danger and significance than either of them could have imagined when their carefully constructed plans had begun just days before. The day of the pack trials arrived beneath a clear autumn sky, the Academy's training grounds transformed into an elaborate arena filled with banners representing dozens of visiting packs, temporary stands packed with spectators, and an atmosphere of anticipation that Elena found almost unbearable, given the danger she now knew lurked somewhere within the crowd. Gareth had kept his word regarding additional security measures, quietly positioning trusted pack guards throughout the arena under the guise of standard event management. Elena had spent the morning going through the details of their plan with Damon one final time, memorizing emergency signals and escape routes, in case the situation escalated beyond what discreet security could handle. "Stay close to me during the opening ceremonies," Damon instructed, as they made their way toward the competitor staging area. "And remember, if you see the signal, head immediately for the north gate. Nathaniel will be waiting there with a secure vehicle." Elena nodded, her chest tight with anxiety despite her earlier declaration that she would not run from this threat. She understood, rationally, that caution and courage were not mutually exclusive, but the reality of potentially facing representatives of the faction that had destroyed her family left her nerves stretched thin. The opening ceremonies proceeded without incident, the crowd's attention focused on elaborate displays of pack pride and traditional competitive announcements. Elena scanned the assembled spectators repeatedly, searching for any sign of unfamiliar faces that might represent Grim Hollow observers, though the sheer size of the crowd made such identification nearly impossible. She found Bianca seated prominently among the senior students, her expression carefully neutral, though Elena noticed her occasionally glancing toward a small group of unfamiliar adults seated in a reserved section, typically used for distinguished pack visitors. Something about the group's careful, watchful demeanor set Elena's instincts on edge, though she had no concrete proof to confirm her suspicions. "Damon," she said quietly, nodding subtly toward the section in question. "Do you recognize those visitors?" Damon followed her gaze, his expression tightening with recognition. "Those are Grim Hollow representatives," he confirmed grimly. "I recognize two of them, from documents I found in my father's study." Elena's heart began to race, the abstract danger now confirmed as an immediate, physical presence within the arena. "What do we do?" she asked, struggling to keep her voice steady. "We stick to the plan," Damon said firmly. "Stay visible, stay calm, and trust the security measures my father has put in place. If anything seems wrong, we move immediately toward the north gate." The competitive events began shortly after, students demonstrating various combat and strategic skills before the assembled crowd. Elena participated in her assigned events with mechanical precision, her mind only partially focused on the physical challenges before her, the rest consumed by constant awareness of the Grim Hollow observers watching from their reserved section. During a brief pause between events, Elena noticed one of the unfamiliar visitors rising from his seat and making his way toward the competitor staging area, ostensibly to observe the preparations more closely. Something about his deliberate, unhurried pace toward the section where Elena stood sent a fresh wave of alarm through her chest. "Damon," she whispered urgently. "One of them is coming this way." Damon's expression hardened immediately, positioning himself subtly between Elena and the approaching stranger. "Stay calm," he murmured. "Let me handle this." The man approached with a pleasant, professional smile that did little to ease Elena's mounting anxiety. "Forgive the intrusion," he said smoothly. "I couldn't help but notice the young lady's performance during the earlier events. Quite impressive technique for someone without formal pack training." Elena felt her blood run cold at the pointed observation, understanding immediately that this was no casual compliment, but a deliberate probe, designed to confirm suspicions about her background. "She's had excellent instructors," Damon said smoothly, his tone carefully neutral, despite the tension Elena could feel radiating from him. "If you'll excuse us, we need to prepare for the next round of competition." The stranger's smile remained fixed, though something calculating flickered behind his eyes. "Of course," he said, "though I do hope we'll have the opportunity for a more thorough introduction later. I find myself quite curious about promising young students, particularly those with unusual backgrounds." He withdrew before either of them could respond further, returning to his seat among the other Grim Hollow representatives, though Elena noticed him engaging in quiet, urgent conversation with his companions, immediately upon sitting down. "They suspect," Elena said, panic creeping into her voice. "We need to leave now." "Not yet," Damon said, though his own composure was clearly fraying. "If we run now, without confirmation of actual danger, we might trigger exactly the response we're trying to avoid. Let's find my father first." They located Gareth near the judge's platform, quickly explaining the troubling interaction that had just occurred. Gareth's expression grew grim as he listened, immediately signaling to several of the discreetly positioned security personnel. "We need to move Elena to a secure location immediately," Gareth said, his voice low and urgent. This confirms my worst fears about their true intentions here. Before they could implement this plan, however, chaos erupted at the arena's northern entrance. Shouts and the sound of physical confrontation drew everyone's attention, as several figures, moving with clear coordinated purpose, began pushing through the crowd toward the competitor staging area. "They're making their move," Damon said, his voice tight with alarm. "Elena, we need to go, now." Security personnel scrambled to intercept the approaching threat, but the sheer chaos of the panicked crowd made coordinated response difficult. Elena felt Damon's hand grip hers firmly as he pulled her toward an alternate exit, away from the growing commotion. They had barely covered 20 feet when two more figures emerged directly in their path, blocking the route Damon had intended to use. Elena recognized one of them as the man who had approached them earlier, his pleasant facade now completely abandoned in favor of cold, calculated purpose. "Elena Voss," he said, his voice carrying an edge of triumph. "Or should I say, the last heir of the Wraithmore pack. We've been searching for you for quite some time." "Stay back," Damon warned, positioning himself protectively in front of Elena, his own posture shifting into something more aggressive, more prepared for physical confrontation than Elena had ever seen from him before. "This doesn't need to become complicated," the stranger said smoothly. "We simply need to verify her identity and discuss the terms of her situation with the appropriate parties. Nothing more." "I don't believe you," Elena said, her voice steadier than she expected despite her racing heart. "You destroyed my family. I know exactly what your coalition is capable of." The stranger's expression hardened slightly at her defiance. "That's unfortunate," he said. "I had hoped this could be resolved peacefully." What happened next unfolded with dizzying speed. The two Grim Hollow representatives moved to close the distance, but before they could reach Elena and Damon, a coordinated response from Gareth's security personnel intercepted them from multiple directions, overwhelming their numbers and quickly subduing the confrontation before it could escalate further. Elena watched, breathless and shaking, as the Grim Hollow representatives were forcibly restrained, their earlier confidence replaced by obvious shock at the swift, decisive response. Gareth himself arrived moments later, his expression carrying the full weight of alpha authority as he confronted the restrained representatives. "This ends now," Gareth declared, his voice carrying clearly across the now silent crowd that had gathered to witness the confrontation. "Any further negotiations between our pack and the Grim Hollow Coalition are permanently terminated, effective immediately. Your attempt to use violence against a student under my protection, at an academy under my patronage, represents an unforgivable breach of any agreement we might have considered." The restrained representatives said nothing, their expressions carrying a mixture of anger and grudging acceptance of their failed scheme. Security personnel moved to escort them from the grounds, their presence at the academy formally and permanently revoked. As the immediate danger passed, Elena found herself trembling uncontrollably, the adrenaline of the confrontation finally catching up with her exhausted nervous system. Damon immediately wrapped his arms around her, offering steady support as her legs threatened to give way beneath the weight of everything that had just occurred. "You're safe now," he murmured against her hair. "It's over, Elena. You're safe." Elena allowed herself to lean into his embrace, drawing strength from his steady presence as the surrounding crowd slowly began to process what they had witnessed. Whispers spread rapidly through the assembled students, the true nature of Elena's identity and history, now impossible to conceal from the wider academy community. Gareth approached them both once the immediate chaos had settled, his expression carrying a complicated mixture of relief and lingering guilt. "I owe you both an apology," he said quietly. "My earlier hesitation nearly cost us dearly today. I should have acted more decisively from the moment I learned the truth about the situation." "You acted in time," Damon said, though his tone carried a note of continued disappointment in his father's earlier reluctance. "That's what matters most right now." Elena, still shaken but gradually regaining her composure, looked up at Gareth with an expression of cautious gratitude. "Thank you," she said, "for stopping them before things got worse." Gareth nodded solemnly. "It's the least I could do, given how much danger my own earlier negotiations placed you in." He paused, studying her with renewed consideration. "The last heir of the Wraithmore pack. I confess, I never expected to encounter such history walking the halls of this academy." Elena felt the weight of her true identity, now publicly exposed, settling over her with a strange mixture of vulnerability and relief. The secret she had guarded so carefully for years had finally been revealed, not through malicious exposure, but through genuine crisis, witnessed by an entire academy that now understood, in vivid and undeniable terms, exactly what she had survived to reach this point. As the pack trials resumed later that day, delayed but not entirely derailed by the morning's dramatic events, Elena found herself the subject of an entirely new kind of attention, no longer whispered suspicion, but open respect and curiosity about the remarkable strength and resilience she had demonstrated throughout the crisis. Whatever challenges remained ahead, she understood now that she would face them not as a hidden secret desperately protecting her identity, but as herself, fully revealed, standing beside Damon, with newfound confidence in exactly who she was and what she had overcome. In the weeks following the confrontation at the pack trials, Silverclaw Academy transformed in ways Elena could scarcely have imagined during her first anxious days as an unknown transfer student. The truth of her heritage, once a carefully guarded secret, had become common knowledge throughout the academy, and rather than the suspicion and rejection she had always feared, she found herself welcomed with genuine warmth by students who had witnessed her courage firsthand. The formal investigation into the Grim Hollow Coalition's activities revealed troubling details about the extent of their infiltration attempts, confirming that Bianca's family had indeed maintained secret ties to the coalition, providing information about Elena's background in exchange for promises of future political advantage. Bianca herself, faced with undeniable evidence of her family's involvement, was quietly withdrawn from the academy by her parents before formal disciplinary proceedings could be completed, her absence marking a quiet but significant end to the social tensions that had defined much of Elena's early experience at Silverclaw. Gareth Ashworth, humbled by the near-catastrophic consequences of his earlier political calculations, dedicated himself to fully severing his pack's remaining connections to the Grim Hollow Coalition, working instead to strengthen legitimate alliances with packs who shared genuine commitment to protecting their territories and members, rather than pursuing advantage through morally compromised negotiations. For Elena and Damon, the aftermath of the crisis brought a new clarity to their relationship. Free now from the secrecy and uncertainty that had shadowed its earlier development, they no longer needed to hide their growing affection from curious classmates or worry about the political implications of being seen together. Their connection now openly acknowledged and, increasingly, celebrated by an academy community that had witnessed the genuine depth of loyalty and care they had demonstrated for one another under extraordinary pressure. On a crisp evening, several weeks after the trials, Elena found herself once again in the quiet garden, where she and Damon had shared some of their most significant conversations, though this time, the atmosphere carried none of the anxious uncertainty that had characterized their earlier meetings there. Damon joined her beneath their familiar oak tree, carrying a small package that he handed to her, with an expression of nervous anticipation she found endearing, given everything they had already faced together. "What's this?" Elena asked, curious as she accepted the carefully wrapped item. "Open it," Damon said, watching her with evident anticipation. Elena carefully unwrapped the package to reveal a small, elegantly crafted pendant, its design incorporating subtle elements she recognized, with a jolt of emotion, as traditional Wraithmore pack symbolism, carefully researched and rendered with obvious respect and care. "I had it made specially," Damon explained, his voice slightly uncertain. "I wanted you to have something that honored your true heritage, something that celebrated who you actually are, rather than requiring you to hide it any longer." Elena felt tears welling in her eyes as she studied the intricate craftsmanship, moved beyond words by the thoughtfulness behind the gift.
"Damon,"
she said softly,
"this is beautiful. Thank you."
"There's something else," Damon continued, his nervousness increasing slightly as he reached for her hand. "Elena, these past months have shown me more about myself, about what genuine connection actually means, than my entire life before you arrived here. I know we're still young, and I know there's still complicated politics surrounding both our futures, but I wanted you to know clearly, without any ambiguity, exactly how I feel." Elena's heart raced as she waited for him to continue, sensing the significance of whatever he intended to say. "I love you," Damon said simply, the words carrying weight and sincerity that left no room for doubt. Not because of politics, not because of alliance, not for any reason beyond the simple truth that you are the person I want beside me, regardless of whatever challenges our futures might hold. Elena felt overwhelming emotion sweep through her, the culmination of months of uncertainty, danger, and growing connection, finally crystallizing into this single, profound moment of clarity. "I love you too," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You've given me something I never thought I'd find again after losing my family, a genuine sense of belonging, of being valued for exactly who I am." They sat together beneath the ancient oak tree as evening settled fully into night. The pendant Damon had given her, now secured around her neck, a visible symbol of the heritage she no longer needed to hide, and the relationship that had grown from reluctant academic partnership into something profound and enduring. In the following weeks, as the academic year drew toward its conclusion, Elena found herself increasingly integrated into the broader fabric of pack politics that governed Silverclaw's community. Gareth, working to formally acknowledge the significance of her surviving heritage, began quiet discussions with regional pack councils about potentially restoring some measure of recognized status to the Wraithmore lineage, understanding that Elena, as its last surviving heir, represented an important piece of history that deserved acknowledgement rather than continued obscurity. Elena approached these developments with characteristic caution, uncertain what restored status might mean for her future, but increasingly confident that whatever path emerged, she would face it with the same resilience that had carried her through every previous challenge, now supported by genuine friends and a partner who had proven, repeatedly, his unwavering commitment to standing beside her, regardless of complication or danger. Oliver, delighted by the positive resolution to months of dramatic tension, threw himself enthusiastically into planning a celebration marking the end of the academic year, insisting that Elena's remarkable journey deserved proper recognition among the friends who had supported her throughout. "You've come a long way," he observed during one of their final conversations before the year's formal closing ceremony, from the nervous new student who tried desperately to remain invisible. Elena laughed, genuinely amused by his characterization of the tumultuous journey that had led her to this point. Whatever she had originally expected from her time at Silverclaw Academy, reality had proven far more complicated, far more dangerous, but ultimately, far more rewarding than she could have anticipated. The closing ceremony arrived on a bright, clear afternoon. The entire academy gathered once more in the main hall, though this time the atmosphere carried none of the tension that had characterized the earlier assembly where Bianca's schemes had first been publicly exposed. Elena sat beside Damon, surrounded by friends who had supported her through every crisis, watching as the headmaster delivered closing remarks, celebrating the achievements of the academic year. When the ceremony concluded and students began filing out into the warm afternoon sunshine, Damon reached for Elena's hand, guiding her toward a quiet corner of the courtyard, where they could speak privately amid the celebratory chaos surrounding them. "What happens now?" Elena asked, aware that the conclusion of the academic year would bring new questions about their future, about the ongoing political developments surrounding her restored heritage, about whatever challenges still lay ahead for both of them. "Whatever happens," Damon said, his expression carrying the same steady confidence that had first drawn her attention during their earliest encounters, "we face it together. That hasn't changed, and it never will." Elena smiled, drawing comfort and strength from his unwavering commitment, the same quality that had first distinguished him from every other student vying for attention within Silverclaw's competitive social landscape. She had arrived at this academy as an outsider, with no pack, no name, and no expectation of finding genuine connection amid the constant performance and status-seeking that defined so much of academy life. Instead, she had found something far more valuable, a partner who saw past every pretense to genuinely understand and value who she actually was, friends who supported her through unimaginable danger, and a renewed sense of identity and belonging that she had once believed lost forever alongside her destroyed birth pack. As they walked together through the sun-drenched courtyard, surrounded by the celebratory energy of a concluding academic year, Elena felt genuine peace settle over her for the first time since her family's tragic history had first begun to unravel months earlier. Whatever the future held, whatever new challenges or political complications might arise from her restored heritage, she faced it now with confidence, strength, and the unwavering support of the one person who had chosen her, consistently and genuinely, above every expectation, and every alternative that status and politics might have suggested. Every girl in the academy had once competed fiercely for the alpha heir's attention, employing elaborate schemes and careful performances designed to capture his interest. In the end, he had chosen the one girl who had never competed at all, who had simply been herself, honest and unguarded, throughout every challenge they had faced together. And in choosing her, Damon had discovered something far more valuable than status or alliance, a genuine, enduring love built on trust, respect, and shared resilience that would carry them both confidently into whatever future awaited beyond the walls of Silverclaw Academy.